Nazi troops invaded Poland on September 1, 1939. Witold and Major Włodarkiewicz established the Polish Secret Army on November 9 of the same year. This group later joined up with other resistance groups to form the Home Army. The newly built Auschwitz concentration camp, which was put into action in the spring of 1940, had reports of its circumstances sent to the Polish resistance. Those initial reports came from civilians, including railroad workers and locals, as well as from convicts who had been liberated from the camp. Pilecki had a daring plan. He would take up residence as an inmate at Auschwitz in order to get to the bottom of the very unsettling rumors and discover just what was happening there. His authorities eventually consented to let him go after some persuasion, to the dismay of the real Tomasz Serafiński, who was supposed to be dead at the time, thus why his papers and identity were chosen, but was alive. He adopted the alias Tomasz Serafiński. When a Nazi roundup started called a Lepanka, where a city block would abruptly be closed off, and the majority of the civilians inside would be rounded up and sent to slave labor camps, or sometimes just mass executed on the spot. A member of the resistance allegedly came to help Pilecki hide. According to Eleonora Ostrowska, the owner of an apartment Pilecki was at when he was taken, Witold rejected those opportunities and didn't even try to hide. She claimed that on September 19, 1940, a German soldier knocked on her door, and Pilecki said in a hushed voice, "Report that I have fulfilled the order," before opening the door and being taken away. It is crucial to emphasize that at this point, he was unsure if he would be transferred to Auschwitz. Since the roundups were still ongoing, Pilecki's imprisonment could have led to him being tortured or murdered any other Nazi-run prison. They may have transported him to Palmyra and killed him there. They could have, at the very least, taken him to one of Germany's colonies for forced labor. He was sent to Auschwitz, as he had wanted, perhaps the only person to ever hope such a thing. Later, he gave this account of his arrival. Everything was distributed into bags with corresponding numbers tied to them. The hair on our heads and bodies were shaved off, and we received a misting of cold water. I was hit with a big rod that struck me in the jaw, which made 2 of my teeth fall out. We were reduced to numbers at that point, and I was wearing the number 4859. All the principles to which we had grown used to this earth were brutally trampled upon. The shortage of food provided to prisoners, according to Pilecki, was one of the first signs he noticed that Auschwitz was different from a typical prison camp. He claimed that the rations provided to prisoners were calculated in such a way that people would live for 6 weeks. Pilecki's task did not only include evaluating the conditions inside Auschwitz, he also took control over the Związek Organizacji Wojskowych, or the ZOW, a rebel group that was established inside the camp. The objectives of ZOW included boosting prisoner morale, distributing any spare food and clothing, establishing an intelligence network inside the camp, preparing inmates to one day rebel against their guards, and delivering news into and out of the concentration camp. Pilecki organized the ZOW in groups in order to maintain its secrecy. Even though each group's leader only knew the identities of the few individuals under his control, he had faith in them to survive questioning by the guards. This reduced the risk to the entire organization in the event that a guard was tipped off by an informant, or if a member was apprehended. Pilecki's initial reports to the Polish government and Allied forces came from freed captives. However, as prisoner releases declined, the success of prisoner escapes, like the one on June 20, 1942, when 4 Poles dressed as SS members with weapons and stole an SS car and drove it out of the camp's main gate, became increasingly important for getting information out to the outside world. In 1942, reports were transmitted using a radio that was constructed over the course of 7 months as parts could be acquired. However, one of the group's big mouth caused the Nazis to learn about the radio, forcing the group to disassemble it before they were caught and executed. The first mention of the camp's usage of gas chambers and the toxic hydrogen cyanide gas Zyklon B can be found in Pilecki's reports. Early in September 1941, when the Nazis used Zyklon B gas to kill 850 Polish and Soviets in Block 11 of Auschwitz, he witnessed its first usage. ZOW was able to maintain a fairly accurate running tally of the estimated number of deaths and the approximate number of prisoners coming into the camp, writing at one point that over 1,000 a day from the new transports were gassed. In the brand new crematoria, the bodies were burned. The Polish government received all of the reports, and they relayed the data to the rest of the Allied forces. Though the Allies questioned the authenticity of Pilecki's accounts, and believed the claims of mass murder, hunger, harsh and systemic torture, gas chambers, medical experiments were greatly overstated. Note: several 100,000 people were killed in Auschwitz during Pilecki's nearly 3 years there, and in addition to the deaths and horrifying tortures, countless others were subjected to a variety of experiments by people like the Angel of Death, Dr. Josef Mengele. Between 1 and 5 million individuals are thought to have died at the camp overall. Pilecki's plot to incite an uprising inside Auschwitz never materialized due to serious doubts about the reliability of his findings. When the Allies and Polish underground offered assistance, Pilecki was able to persuade his network of resistance fighters inside the camp that they could effectively seize power for a brief period of time and then escape. He had imagined Allied soldiers assaulting the camp and dropping weapons from the sky. However, the Allies never intended to carry out such an operation, and the Warsaw-based Polish resistance chose not to assault because of the numerous German soldiers stationed nearby. Pilecki felt he needed to personally request action in Auschwitz after his reports of the Nazi Guard's systematic elimination of ZOW resistance members were ignored. He had his opportunity in April of 1943. He and 2 others were given the night shift at a bakery outside the camp's perimeter gate. They overpowered a guard and cut the phone lines at a perfect moment. The 3 males then fled out of the bakery's back entrance. Pilecki reported that shots were fired behind them as they fled. It's difficult to put into words how quickly we were moving. We were ripping the air into rags with swift hand motions. It should be underlined that the local population was well aware that anyone discovered aiding an Auschwitz escapee would be executed along with the fugitive prisoner. The 40 square kilometers surrounding Auschwitz were also carefully guarded, and anyone who saw the escapees would immediately recognize them due to their removed hair, torn clothing, and dehydrated appearance. Despite this, all 3 of them not only made it through their initial escape, but also made it to safety without being apprehended. Sadly, Pilecki's strategy to rally support for liberating Auschwitz was unsuccessful. On August 25, 1943, he arrived at the Home Army's headquarters and firmly argued that the Home Army should devote all its resources to liberating Auschwitz, but the concept was rejected as being too risky. In his last report on Auschwitz, he further vented his resentment toward his superiors' cowardliness. Following this, Pilecki kept fighting for the Home Army while also making an effort to help ZOW in any manner he could from the outside. He also participated in the August 1944 Warsaw Uprising, which led to his capture by German forces in October of that same year, and his imprisonment for the remainder of World War II. The report on Auschwitz was later published in a book titled The Auschwitz Volunteer: Beyond Bravery. You see, the Soviet-backed Polish Committee of National Liberation had taken over as the new occupying force after the German invasion. Even after his cover was exposed in July 1946, Pilecki persisted in his mission of documenting the numerous crimes the Soviets and their puppet government in Poland had committed against the Polish people. He also refused to leave the country. He was ultimately detained on May 7, 1947, by the Ministry of Public Security because of this. He was severely tormented for several months following his arrest, having his ribs and nose crushed in addition to having his fingernails torn off. He later described his time in this particular prison to his wife, saying that Auschwitz was just a nuisance in comparison to them. He was finally granted a mock trial when other Auschwitz survivors pleaded for Pilecki's release with the then Prime Minister of Poland, Józef Sienkiewicz, himself an Auschwitz survivor and member of a resistance in the prison. He went the other way and wrote to the judge, telling him to throw out records of Pilecki's time as a prisoner in Auschwitz. Given that Pilecki was accused of being a German collaborator during the war, this was a crucial piece of proof in his favor. Pilecki was thus found guilty of working with the Germans and being a spy for the West, among other allegations, and ultimately condemned to death by gunshot to his head as part of a crackdown by the new Polish government against former members of the Home Army resistance. The punishment was executed on May 25, 1948, by Sergeant Piotr Smietański, often known as the Butcher of Mokotów Prison. According to reports, Witold Pilecki's final words were "Long live free Poland." You might find it weird that Pilecki constantly and voluntarily put himself in extremely risky situations, despite having a wife and children at home. In The Death of Captain Pilecki, the Polish actor Marek Probos, who thoroughly researched Pilecki before playing him, said of this, "Human beings were the most important thing for Pilecki. and especially those who were oppressed. He would do whatever to aid and free them. Pilecki's son, Andrzej, later echoed this idea when he said, "My father would write that we should live good lives to respect others and nature. He advised my sister to be cautious of every tiny ladybug, not to walk on it, but to place it on a leaf instead because everything has a purpose." When Pilecki's family was experiencing hardship 2 years after his execution, a man approached Pilecki's adolescent son and said, "I was in prison as a guard with your father. Your father was a saint. He influenced me, and I made changes in my life. I don't hurt people anymore. He taught people of all ages to respect all forms of life, not just his own."